The silence was louder than her thoughts. The kitchen light flickered above her as if even the house was tired of holding on. She stared at the half-empty cup of coffee, untouched for hours. The silence was deafening, not the peaceful kind, but the one that screamed louder than a crowded room. For weeks now, Julia hadn't spoken to anyone beyond a few nods at the grocery store. The walls around her had grown too quiet, yet her mind was louder than ever. Regret, guilt, loneliness. All of them screamed at once. There was no more strength to pretend everything was okay. No one knew how close she was. Not even her sister, who used to call every Sunday. Not even the pastor, who hadn't seen her since Christmas. She hadn't prayed in months. She hadn't cried in days. But that night, both would return. The last thread holding her together. The fridge hummed quietly in the background, the only sound breaking the unbearable stillness. Julia's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the photo frame by the counter. It was cracked, the glass splintered across the image of a younger version of herself, smiling, hopeful, alive. That version was gone. So many things had been taken from her. The job she gave her soul to, the man who promised forever, the baby she never got to hold. One by one, pieces of her life had slipped away until nothing felt solid anymore. What hurt most wasn't the loss. It was how normal the emptiness had become. Every morning she woke up wondering why she had. Every night she lay down hoping she wouldn't. And now, tonight, it felt like even hope itself had stopped showing up. Except for one thing. A small slip of paper tucked in her journal. A verse from years ago that she never understood. It was the only thing she hadn't thrown away. She didn't know it yet, but that little scrap of forgotten scripture would become a voice louder than any pain she had ever felt. The burr she couldn't let go. She unfolded the worn-out paper slowly, hands shaking as if afraid the words might vanish if she looked too long. It was barely legible now, faded ink, creased edges, but she knew the verse by heart, even though she never truly understood it. Be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10. She had kept it since college. Back then, it was a gift from an old roommate during finals week, a moment of comfort in the chaos. But tonight, it felt different. Be still. How could she? Her heart was a battlefield. Her thoughts were screaming. And yet, something about that sentence made her pause. Not just pause, breathe, like it was meant to find her again, right now, at her lowest. She sat down on the floor, clutching the verse, whispering it to herself over and over. Something in the air shifted. She didn't hear a voice, but she felt a presence. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't completely alone in the room. When the lights went out, as if responding to her fragile moment of surrender, the light above her suddenly went out. No flicker, just darkness. She froze. The sudden blackness didn't scare her. It felt symbolic, like even the house had decided it was time to shut down. But instead of panic, there was stillness. She lit a candle from the drawer, the flame shaking with her breath. The shadows it cast on the walls danced like memories, some too painful to look at directly. But she didn't turn away. She sat in silence, eyes on the flame, verse still in her hand. Then something strange happened. In the quiet of that room, she felt something press against her spirit. A pull, a whisper, but not from her own mind. It wasn't words, not yet. It was a sense, a presence, as if something or someone was sitting right beside her, watching, waiting. And she, for the first time in years, whispered back, "If you're really there, say something." The whisper that wasn't hers. At first, there was only silence. Then, something moved. Not outside, not in the room, inside her. It wasn't a thought, at least not one she could claim. It came from a place too deep, too calm, too pure, like a ripple across still water. And then, softly, gently, unmistakably, a whisper. Not in her ears, not out loud, but inside. A voice she'd never heard before, yet it felt like it had known her forever. And it said only this, "I never left you." Her breath caught. Her tears came instantly. She dropped the verse. Her hands shook. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't memory. It was him. And for the first time in months, she felt something that had become almost foreign. Hope. The daylight. After the breakdown, she must have fallen asleep on the floor. When the morning light crept through the window, It found her curled up with tear-streaked cheeks, the candle burnt out beside her. But something was different. It wasn't the kind of morning where everything had magically changed. No, her problems were still there. The bills, the silence, the ache. But she was different. There was a softness in her chest, a strange peace in the middle of all that pain, like someone had stitched her soul back together during the night, just enough to keep going. She stood up slowly, picked up the small paper again, and smiled through the tears. Be still, and know. Now she knew. That whisper hadn't been a dream. It had been a promise. And today, she would take the first small step back into life. Not because everything was fixed, but because he was still with her. The stranger at the door. Late that afternoon, just as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, a knock. 3 soft taps on the door. Julia flinched. No one had visited in months. Maybe a delivery by mistake. She peeked through the curtain. An older woman stood there, unfamiliar. Mid-60s maybe, wearing a pale blue sweater, holding a bag of groceries. Hesitant, Julia opened the door slightly. The woman smiled gently. "You don't know me," she said, "but I was walking past and I just felt like I was supposed to stop here." Julia didn't respond. She couldn't. "I don't know what you're going through," the woman continued, "but I know someone who does." She handed Julia a small paper bag, patted her hand, and walked away. No explanation, no questions. Inside the bag, soup, bread, a note. It said only, "He hears you." Julia collapsed to her knees in the hallway. The whisper hadn't just been real, it was moving in her life already. Signs in the smallest things that night. Everything felt sharper. The hum of the fridge, the breeze coming through the cracked window, the flicker of candlelight dancing on her wall. But most of all, Julia noticed the way her heart had changed. She wasn't searching desperately for answers anymore. Now she was noticing the whispers. She found her old Bible, buried in the back of a drawer she hadn't opened in years. When she opened it, a pressed flower fell out, one she didn't remember keeping. It had a tiny note folded inside. "If you're looking, you'll see me." She began to smile more, even if her eyes still carried pain. She took short walks again, spoke to the cashier with kindness. She lit candles and whispered prayers, not perfectly, but honestly. And slowly, the world started speaking back. A song played on the radio with the exact words she needed. A bird landed on her window the moment she asked for a sign. A neighbor who never spoke waved and said, "You look lighter today." These weren't coincidences. They were confirmations. When her past returned, unexpectedly, Julia was slowly rebuilding. But the past never knocks before it enters. That Thursday morning, she found an envelope at her doorstep. No return address, no stamp, just her name, handwritten on the front. Inside, a photo, her and Michael, smiling, years ago, and a note. "You were never forgotten. I'm sorry I vanished. Michael, the man who once swore he'd stay, the man who left when she needed him most, the man who never met the baby she lost." Her knees gave out beneath her. She held the letter with trembling hands, unsure if she should cry, scream, or thank God. Because as painful as it was, this too was part of the answer, part of what she unknowingly prayed for when she whispered for healing. Sometimes God doesn't just send flowers. He sends the things we buried, so we never have to run again. The dream that opened her eyes. That night, Julia fell asleep with a heavy heart. The letter from Michael still on the table, her Bible open to Psalms. And then came the dream. But this wasn't an ordinary dream. It was vivid, deep, too real. She stood in a golden field, bathed in a soft light, as if heaven itself had wrapped around her. There was no sound, only peace, deeper than she'd ever known. Then, she saw someone in the distance, a man, simple clothes, strong, gentle eyes. He didn't say her name. He didn't need to. He walked toward her and spoke one sentence. "I saw every tear you cried alone, and I never left." She dropped to her knees. He placed a hand gently on her head. "You thought the pain was the end, but it was the beginning of healing." Julia woke up with tears on her face. But this time, they weren't broken tears. They were holy. The phone call she never expected. The morning sun barely peeked through the curtains when her phone rang. Unknown number. She hesitated. For months, every call had been a reminder of debt collectors or wrong numbers. But something told her, Pick it up. She did. Julia? Her breath caught. It was him. Michael. I didn't know if you'd answer. I wasn't even sure you still had the same number, he said. Voice shaky, vulnerable. She didn't speak. Not yet. I sent you that letter. I didn't expect forgiveness. I needed to say something after all these years. Silence. Then he whispered, I've changed. Life broke me too, but I never stopped thinking about you. Julia closed her eyes. The pain resurfaced. The love, the confusion, and then something she didn't expect. She took a breath. I'm not the same either, she said quietly. But maybe that's not a bad thing. The call didn't fix everything, but it opened a door, and this time she wouldn't shut it out of fear. The letter she wrote to herself. That evening, the house was quiet again. No calls, no visitors, no signs or whispers, just her and the thoughts she had spent years avoiding. But this time, she didn't run. She sat at the table with a blank sheet of paper. And for the first time in over a decade, she wrote, not to anyone else, but to herself. Dear Julia, you survived what almost killed you. You kept breathing when it hurt to exist. You waited for a voice, and heaven answered. I'm proud of you. I forgive you. And I believe in you, even when you don't. She folded the paper, pressed it to her chest, and let the tears fall freely. No shame, no judgment, just healing. Because sometimes the person we need to hear from is the version of ourselves we thought was gone forever. Her first step toward tomorrow. The next morning wasn't magical. The sky was cloudy. The bills were still unpaid. The ache of the past still lingered in the corners of her home. But something was different. Julia didn't start the day by scrolling or crying. She brewed coffee. She opened the window. She smiled. It wasn't about being fixed. It was about being willing. She got dressed, tied her hair back, and walked out the door, not to escape, but to begin. She didn't know what the day would bring, but she no longer needed to know. Each step on the sidewalk felt like defiance, each breath a quiet rebellion against despair, because she finally understood. The whisper from heaven hadn't just saved her from a moment, it had called her into a future, and now she was walking toward it. The miracle she never asked for it happened on a Tuesday. She was standing in line at the local market. Nothing special in her cart, just bread, tea, and a few candles. Behind her, a young mother struggled with a crying toddler and a bag of dropped apples. Without thinking, Julia knelt to help. Their eyes met, and the mother whispered, "Thank you. I'm just so tired." Julia smiled softly. "I know." That was all. Nothing dramatic, just two souls crossing paths. But when Julia stepped outside, something hit her. She had become what she once needed. A calm voice in someone else's chaos. A helping hand when no one else was looking. A small light in a world full of shadows. She didn't plan it, didn't chase it, but her healing had quietly become someone else's miracle. Not with a spotlight, but with presence, with love, and somewhere deep in her spirit, she heard it again. I never left, and now, neither will you. The voice that became her own. She no longer waited for whispers. Not because they stopped coming, but because they had settled inside her. Julia was different now. She still had quiet days, still had memories that hurt, but she no longer feared the silence, because it had become sacred. The voice that once found her in her darkest moment was now the voice she carried with her, in how she spoke, in how she listened, in how she loved. She volunteered at the shelter twice a week. She wrote letters to strangers who were hurting. She walked slowly, spoke gently, and lived intentionally. One evening, she passed a young girl sitting alone on a park bench, eyes distant, spirit heavy. Julia sat beside her and whispered, "I don't know what you're going through, but I know what it's like to feel invisible." The girl turned. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Julia saw her old self and smiled, because now she wasn't just healed, she was the healing.